This next fly we're going to tie is called a Jujubee Midge. This is one of my patterns that I came up with several years ago to imitate a midge pupa emerging from the stream bottom. It's tied on a Tiemco 2488. It's that same 2 extra short, wide gap, fine wire hook that we've tied a few other flies on. And I'm going to start by tying a thread base just behind the hook eye. The thread that I'll use for the abdomen of the fly is a small flat thread. In this case I'm using Good Broad 10-aught, which isn't made anymore. The next most appropriate thread is Lagerton 74 denier. You want something that's very flat and very smooth to keep the body as skinny as possible. So what I'll do here is I'm going to start with that thread, but I'm going to walk you through a few of the materials as we go. We're going to make the body out of super hair. Super hair is a nylon material most often used in saltwater flies. We're going to put this together to make a ribbed body on the fly. We're going to use just a little bit of this to create the body. The wing case is going to be made out of white floral fiber. Floral fiber is raw organza, which is a real shiny material but very fine, very supple in the water. We're going to use that for our wing case, and our thorax is just going to be black 8-aught tying thread. Not a terribly complicated pattern, but I get asked a lot of questions on this fly, so I'll try to walk through it as clearly as I can as we go through, and I'll walk you through the steps to keep the body all lined up nice and neat. So as I said, I'm going to start the thread just behind the hook eye, maybe an eye length or 2. I'll start that white thread, and I'm not going to make a thread base. I'm just going to lay the thread in on the hook. And in this case, we're going to tie a black and white jujubee. So I'm going to get 2 strands of this black super hair. And I'll set those aside, and I'm going to get 1 strand of white. The white is going to be our rib color, the black is going to be our primary color. And you can do this in all sorts of color variations: red and white, olive and black, chartreuse and black, orange and brown, any variety of color combinations. The idea being that use 2 strands of your primary color and 1 strand of your rib color. Your colors are not limited by anything other than how much super hair you've got. So I'm going to take these 3 strands, I've got all 3 of them here, and you can see there's some kink to this material. What I'll do, just to make this a little easier to work with, is I'm just going to stretch this like I'd be straightening a leader. I'm going to run my fingers down, and I'm not pulling terribly hard on it, but that'll take some of that kink out, make the material a little easier to work with. I'm going to cut all 3 ends square, so they're all the same length, and I'm going to lay these in on my near side of the hook and trap them with a couple turns of thread. I'll pull those down to length so that the stub ends are just behind the hook eye, and I'm going to wrap back over these. Now, one question that I get on this all the time is whether or not it makes any difference what order those fibers are in, and it really doesn't make a difference. It's not going to show on the finished fly anywhere except for the very first turn. And I've never had a fish look that closely to see if they're lined up there or not, so I don't worry about that anymore. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to wrap back over them with the thread, just 1 turn right next to the other, as smooth and thin as possible, back about halfway down the hook bend, and then I'll bring the thread back up to where we started. And again, I want to try to keep it as smooth and flat as I can, so occasionally I'll stop to unwind that thread so it lays flat. All right, now comes the tricky part. We're going to try to wrap all 3 of these strands at the same time, and the idea being that they're going to lay flat 3 next to each other as they come up the hook. The trick to this is as we come around the hook bend here, I'm going to come underneath, I'm going to come straight up with this first turn. Conventional wisdom kind of makes you want to wrap everything at a right angle to the hook shank, which in this case back here at the bend is a little tilted. What that will do, if we do that, we're going to get some separation on those fibers as we wrap up the hook. So on this fly we want to keep these wraps straight up and down, particularly this first turn. We'll end up with a little bit of white thread showing at the bend, but we're going to trade that for a nice evenly segmented body as it goes up the hook. So I'm going to come straight up and down on this first turn and drop the fibers over the hook. And then from there, everything's going to wrap parallel the rest of the way up the shank. And that's going to create a nice light dark segment, continuing on up the shank, up to about 2 eye lengths back from the hook eye. Once I get there, I'm going to tie this off with a couple nice firm wraps of thread. I'll trim these stub ends off. And I'll reserve these aside because they're still good, a couple more flies out of that. I'm going to whip finish this white thread, and I'll trim it off. And then I'm going to come in and start my black thread right over the front end of the abdomen. Now for the wing case, I'm going to take about 10 or 12 strands of floral fiber. And I say 10 or 12 because that's an important number to count. One of the most common things I see tyers do is use way too much floral fiber on a little fly like this. So we're just going to use 10 or 12 strands. And I want to cut the ends so that they're all square. And I'll lay them on top of the hook and trap them in place. I'll pull those butt ends down to length. And I want to anchor that right square on top of the hook. This is going to become our wing case and our wing buds here on the finished fly. So now I'm going to build a bit of a thorax. And this is just with thread wraps. And I want the thorax about half again the diameter of the abdomen. Now you'll notice that I left just a little bit of bare space here behind the hook eye in our index point. We're going to need that here in a minute when we go to put in the wing buds. I'm going to pull the floral fiber out over the hook eye using my thread hand, and I'll tie this down on top of the shank with just a couple turns. We're going to get a nice wide band across the top of the fly for the wing case. This is where it's handy to know how many fibers you started with, because we're going to divide the remaining butt ends here in half. So if we had 12 to start with, we're going to want about 6 on each side. One thing that makes this go a little easier is if you kind of twist these, they'll stay into a nice little bundle on their own. So I'm going to divide half, and I'm going to bring it back on my near side and catch it with a couple turns of thread. Now when I do that, I want to make sure those stay right in line with the hook shank. I'm going to do the same thing on the far side. I'm going to pull these in line with the hook shank. Now keep in mind, your thread torque is going to want to twist those down a little bit. So I'm going to hold them just slightly up, so when my thread torque takes effect, it keeps them lined up with the hook shank. I'm going to finish off just a few turns here at the head. The head on this little fly is actually part of the bug, so I try actually to build a little bulk with it rather than keep it as small as possible. It is a part of the fly. So now I'll come in and I'll whip finish my tie-in thread. I'll clip it off. I'm going to trim these wing buds into just short little stubs on the sides of the wing case. So what I'll do is I'll take my thin bladed scissors and put them right against the back edge of the wing case. I'm going to bring those in and trim those wing buds just a touch longer than the wing case is. And there we have a Jujubee Midge. Pretty simple, very variable. You could change the colors up. You can change the colors of the super hair. You can change the colors of the floral fiber. You can even change the colors of the thread. The only thing that remains a constant is a white thread underbody. If you don't use a white thread underbody, the color of the super hair won't show through. It'll always be muddy. So just keep that in mind as you tie these.